Hey guys, my name is Joel. I'm one of the pastors here at Church on the Move, Broken Arrow, and we have something special just for you. Like, we filmed it exclusively for everyone watching online. You may be in Broken Arrow, you may be in Oklahoma, you may be in the United States, you may be internationally, wherever, but we filmed it just for you. And so we're excited to show you this piece. Pastor Ethan is speaking directly for you and to you. And so let's go check it out.
There's no shortage of division in our world. These issues are both complex and deeply personal. We'd all say we want good in the world, justice and peace in our homes, our community, our country. We want unity, right? But who gets to define what that looks like? And as Christ followers, what does that require of us? What does it actually mean to be one?
Hey, what's up? Ethan here. Hope you're having a great day. And during the season, one of the things that God put on our hearts was to spend some time having a conversation as churches around the idea of unity. And our world is more divided than ever before, and I think there's a reason for that. I think we have a spiritual enemy that wants to divide us, because here's the principle you see throughout the Bible, is that where there is unity, there is power. And I believe the reason the enemy is attacking our unity so much right now is because he wants to get to our power. I believe that when a family, a marriage, kids and parents, your job, a business, a school, a church, when we have unity, we have power. And so our hope during the series is simply this, is that by understanding God's thoughts on unity, not only does it bring you closer together with the people that you love and care about the most, but it also brings you the Holy Spirit power that accompanies spiritual unity. And so I want to talk just today for a little bit about a principle we see throughout the Bible, but one of the places it's found is in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 13. This is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, "Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace." The reason that Paul instructs us as followers of Jesus to keep unity is because unity doesn't last on its own. It falls apart. And here's the principle. Everything falls apart. Everything in our life, in this world, naturally decays. It's a universal principle. No matter what it is, no matter how good shape or condition it is in right now, it will tend toward decay. Let me show you what I mean. I want to introduce you to the fifth member of our family. Most of you probably know this. I'm married to my wife, Sarah. We have two boys, Owen and Wyatt, but there's actually a fifth personality in our house, and it's this guy. It's this guy right here. This is Golden Boy. Let me put Golden Boy up here like a ventriloquist puppet. Golden Boy has been a part of my life in a really meaningful way since the year 2000. I got Golden Boy was given to me by the band Bleach. You can see that right here on the front of the shirt. And the reason that a black shirt is called Golden Boy is because it comes from the old television show Seinfeld. And in that show, he has a yellow t-shirt, and he says this. He says, "That's the first shirt that I wear out of the wash every single time it's clean." And that's this shirt for me. So we call him Golden Boy. But look, after 20 years of wear, Golden Boy is dying. Look at this. Golden Boy is an embarrassment to my wife every time I try to wear him. It has extra armholes. This is not where your arm goes. All right, your arm goes up here, but I can put my arm through here just because Golden Boy is generous and likes to give me options. Golden Boy has holes where it's not supposed to have holes. I can actually see you right now through Golden Boy. Golden Boy is dying, but here's the thing. Golden Boy is falling apart, but Golden Boy is falling apart not because I hate him. I love Golden Boy. Golden Boy, I take great care of Golden Boy. In fact, in our house, Golden Boy lives wrapped in parchment paper in a fireproof safe like the Declaration of Independence in our house, like National Treasure. Very, very well taken care of, babied, but yet Golden Boy is still dying. Why? Because everything in our life, no matter how much we love it, will tend toward decay. Here's the picture with your relationships. Relationships fall apart, not just because you don't like people. Relationships fall apart not just because you decide you hate someone. Even relationships with the people you love tend to fall apart. Now that's the bad news. Here's the good news. The reason that Paul tells us to work on that, to keep them close, to maintain the unity of our relationships is because it's possible. So everything we talk about, I hope you hear through ears of grace and hope that it's possible for you to have a great relationship if you'll put the effort in to maintain that unity through what Paul calls the bond of peace, that we would work on keeping those relationships tight. I believe it's possible for every relationship that you value to get better instead of worse. In a world that tries to tear it apart, I believe that more is possible. But it doesn't happen unless we understand what goes on with our relationships. How do they fall apart? What causes them to fragment? Everything in your world falls apart, right? Your driveway gets cracks, your garden gets weeds. Well, relationships don't gather dust or rust like that. Relationships develop separations, or you could say it this way: every relationship left to itself will develop gaps, a gap between you and that other person, a gap between parties. So here's the first question that I have: what causes gaps? What causes relationships to develop gaps? And the first one I think is really obvious, but it's distance. Distance causes gaps. You know this. Every relationship that you've had in your life will probably at some point or another develop a little bit of distance. It's why the cliche goes, long distance relationships don't work, right? Because long distance relationships don't work. You've figured this out in your life. There's been somebody, maybe a high school friend that you have that you don't talk to anymore, a family member that you go, man, I haven't talked to them in years. Odds are you probably don't have a really tight relationship with them when there's distance. In junior high, I had a friend, his name was Wes. Wes and I were best friends in junior high, and we did everything together. When I was like 12, 13 years old, we were inseparable. We went camping, fishing together. We got in trouble together. We made forts together. Listen, Wes and I saw Terminator 2 in the movie theater 15 times. In fact, one Saturday, we went and saw it 5 times in a row because we love Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this movie just blew our minds. We were inseparable until Wes moved to Texas. When Wes moved to Texas, I remember the tearful goodbye, and we're saying, here's what we were saying. You know how this goes. We were saying, we'll talk all the time. I'll call you all the time. And so this was back when telephones had like the long cord on it, like they plugged into the wall. If you don't know what that is, just Google the 1900s and you'll find it. So my mom got this really long telephone cord where I could take the phone into the other room and talk to Wes. And so I remember calling Wes once, and we talked on the phone, and he was in Texas, and everything was great. You know how many times I called Wes after that? 0. You know how many times he called me? 0. Why? It's because we're junior high boys and we don't talk on the phone, and we're just not going to do that. And so our relationship drifted because of distance. But here's what's true. Distance isn't just physical. Distance is also emotional. It can be possible to be close in proximity, close in physical distance to someone, but yet cold emotionally. In fact, we see it all the time. There's 2 people living in the same house, but yet you feel like you're miles apart. You live your life, they live their life. Emotional distance, in fact, I think is even more sinister than physical distance. When my wife and I first got married, I remember there was a moment where she said, I think we're drifting apart. And to which my response was, we're not drifting. I'm where I've always been. We're not drifting, until I realized that as a guy, I was just kind of living my life. We had 2 little kids now, and she was changing diapers and burping babies, and I was working and playing sports and all my hobbies and all the stuff I was doing, and we were starting to live 2 separate lives, even though we lived in the same house. And it wasn't until we sat down to have a conversation about that I even realized that there was this emotional distance growing. What was it creating? It was creating a gap. Distance creates gaps. But here's the other thing that creates gaps, and this is probably something you've experienced in your life, and it's unmet expectations. Unmet expectations create gaps in our lives. When there's an outcome that I project into the future, or I think something is going to work out a specific way, I look into the future, and that becomes my expectation. We carry expectations into every relationship we have all day, every day. Some are small, some are big, but every relationship has unmet expectations. And when my expectations aren't met, it affects my heart. This is why Proverbs 13 says that hope deferred makes the heart sick. It points us to this thought, is that unmet expectations don't just affect my emotions. They don't just affect my feelings. They actually create a gap in my heart. My loves, my affections, ultimately my relationships develop gaps when there are unmet expectations. My wife and I had this when we got married. I'm a saver, she's a spender. And when we first got married, I had an expectation that she was going to handle money exactly the same way that I handled money, and she thought I was going to handle it the way she handled it. And she was really surprised that I very rarely knew how much money I even had, because I just didn't think about it. Money to me was something that was to be used. It was to be used to buy stuff or The gift of giving is one of my spiritual gifts. I love giving stuff away. I don't think about it. I love making people happy, which is a great way to give yourself into debt and end up in a financial ditch. And so my wife is just brilliant with money. She has the mind of an accountant. Well, when we got married, her expectation was I would handle money like her, and mine was that she would handle. I just thought she would be more carefree with our money, and she thought I would be a better saver. And so it wasn't until we sat down and had a conversation about this that we realized that our unmet expectations were creating a gap in our relationship. Now, here's the power of unmet expectations. Unmet expectations don't just affect you, they affect the other person as well. Here's what that means. It means that I cannot expect someone else to fulfill my expectations unless I have expressed them and we have agreed on them. It's not fair for me to expect someone else to handle things a certain way unless I've told them that, unless I've expressed that, and we've agreed on that. One of the best ways to handle unmet expectations, if there's a place in your life where you look at it and you say, I've been hurt by unmet expectations. One of the best questions you can ask is this: have I expressed those expectations? And has that other person agreed with me on how we'll handle them? Because until expectations are expressed and agreed on, they are not fair expectations, they're not realistic expectations, and they will always cause a gap. So here's the question then. If relational gaps are the norm, and these things cause relational gaps, then what goes in the gap? What do I put in the gap to fix it? Because Ethan, I want to fix this gap, or I want our world to be a little closer, and I'd love to be a gap fixer, but I just don't know what to put in the gap. Well, the first is obvious. The first is proximity. Distance always creates distrust. The further I am away from you, the harder it is for me to trust you because I don't really know you. But if distance breeds distrust, proximity breeds empathy. Proximity allows me to be around you, to get to know you, to understand you a little bit more. This is why Jesus said, he's teaching his disciples, and he says something really profound. He says, if you're worshiping in the temple and you have a problem with somebody, there's a gap between you and somebody else. He says this, he says, leave your sacrifice in the temple. Stop worshiping God and go fix it with that person. Now think about what he's saying. He's saying in God's eyes, it is more important that you fix the relationship than you worship me. Think about how amazing that is. God prioritizes getting close to people. He says the only way that you can fix it is you can't stay here. You can't stay where you are. You have to go to where they are. My wife and I lived in California for a while, and we moved to California to lead a church there. And when we moved to California, we bought a little house on the end of a cul-de-sac, and we were really excited about this being our new home. And as we were kind of closing all the paperwork and the deal, we got a call from our realtor. And our realtor said, hey, before this family found out that we were moving there to lead this church, and they went to that church. And so they said, if this is going to be our pastor, we want to make sure he knows what he's getting into. And they said, the realtor said, the sellers want to make sure that you're okay with the neighbors. To which I said, that is a very strange phone call. I've never gotten a phone call like that before. We better lean into this. What's going on with the neighbors? Well, we found out that the neighbor, the guy that lived next door, he was an older gentleman. He had a teenage son, and he wasn't working a job, but yet he was always home, and he had a lot of money, and he was always selling stuff from his house. And the realtor goes, hey, there's like 40 cars over at that house. There's a boat in the driveway, a Sea-Doo in the driveway, a motorcycle, and a bunch of race cars. There's all this stuff in the driveway, but they seem like really nice people. So I guess Sarah and I were just naive enough to go, okay, sounds great. We moved in. When we moved in, here's what we found. The people that lived in the house before us had locks on all the gates. They had built a cement wall between them and their neighbors. And they had surveillance cameras, like high-end motion detecting surveillance cameras, not like Ring doorbells, like high-end surveillance cameras on every corner of the house. They were super paranoid about the next door neighbors. And I found out why is because this guy was allowing all these teenage guys to live with him. He was like the party house, and everybody would go over. His name was Don. Everybody would go over to Don's house. Well, my wife and I decided to do something different. Instead of living behind locked doors and surveillance cameras and pepper spray and shotguns, we decided, why don't we just walk across the yard and get to know Don? And that's what we did. Every day I just made a decision. I'm going to be out in my front yard when all these guys come home. And so I would just be out on my front yard, watering my yard. My yard got way too much water, way more than it ever needed because I just wanted to be out there. And so I started having conversations with Don and talking to Don. He found out I was the pastor of the church. So he called me pastor, and we'd have conversations. Hey, pastor, come over here and look at the stereo I'm putting in this car. And we'd talk about his cars, and he loved to race cars. And he loved these guys that would come over and hang out with his son. And he was kind of a father figure to them because a lot of them didn't have that. And what I found out was pretty fascinating is that Don actually became my biggest ally in that neighborhood. If I ever had a problem with my house, Don and those guys that lived with him wouldn't be the one causing the problem. I could go to them. I could call him anytime I wanted. They would come out of that house, sleeves rolled up, tattoos, barbed wire clubs like full Walking Dead street gang. They would come to protect my house. They had my back. Why? Because they weren't my enemy. But yet the people that lived there before, their answer was to create distance. My answer was to create proximity. And by creating proximity, I closed the relational gap, and I built a relationship with somebody that previously didn't have a great relationship. Proximity closes gaps. But proximity by itself is not enough. Here's what I mean. If you just run into a relationship where there's been a problem and you try to get close, it by itself, it may cause more harm than good. Proximity is what I do, but how I do it matters just as much as what I do. So how do I create proximity? The first attitude that I carry into proximity is curiosity. If I will lead into the gap with curiosity, it changes the conversation and it turns opponents into allies. But here's what a lot of us look like when we want to create proximity. Are you a fighter? I think there's two kinds of people in most relationships, arguers and avoiders. When there's a problem, some of us avoid those problems. Some of us argue our way through them. And if you're an arguer, odds are you kind of like the fight. You're like, let's talk about that. Let's debate that. Let's get into it. Let's mix it up. Now, here's what happens with a lot of us when we want to create proximity, is we walk in, dukes up, and we go, this isn't right. We got to fix this relationship. And here's what we look like to the person on the other side. Let's talk, baby. Let's go. And it feels like a fight. It feels like you're coming in to prove that you're right. It feels like you're coming in to argue. Maybe that's because that's what the history has been. Maybe that's because this is what the person has experienced on the other side of that. If you're trying to create proximity, maybe with your kids when something goes wrong and you go, let's fix this. Let's talk. What's going to happen with that child? They're going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. They're not going to be able to hear anything you're saying. Why? You're saying, Ethan, I'm creating proximity. I'm getting close. But if the posture of my heart isn't right, it will create more harm than good. Curiosity disarms the conversation. Here's how it works. You walk in and you say, I'm curious. Or maybe one of the most powerful things that you can lead with is simply this. I need to talk to you. Listen, I'm puzzled. And then simply ask a question. Instead of accusing someone or coming in with a fight, watch what happens when you come in with curiosity. Curiosity disarms. In fact, I saw a fascinating debate between a really well-known scientist and a guy that believed the earth was flat. And the guy that believed the earth was flat he was ready to argue with this scientist and prove that he was right. And here's the scientist just said something completely fascinating. He said this, he said, can you just explain to me how you came to believe the earth was flat? And by the end of the conversation, these two guys were laughing and debating. It was a totally different conversation simply because the scientist led with curiosity. How can you lead with curiosity with the person that you're trying to close the gap with instead of creating a fight? Curiosity will change the conversation. But there's something I think that's even more powerful, and I think honestly the spiritual heart of this whole conversation about closing gaps. And it's humility. If the attitude of your heart isn't humble when you try to close a gap, it will almost always be interpreted wrong. Humility has the ability to level the playing field. Jesus said it this way. He said, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but yet you can't see this plank that's in your eye? What is he saying? He's using a word picture to say, to God, what it looks like when you try to prove that you're right in a relationship and you don't come in with humility, it looks like you trying to point out that your friend has a splinter on their face when you've got a telephone pole sticking out of your eye. And to God, it looks ridiculous. But humility levels the playing field. And the humility says, I know that I have been forgiven much. And I know that on my own, I could never measure up, and on my own, I could never fix this relationship. But yet, through the grace of God, I want to step in and create wholeness where there's been this gap. And if you give me the chance, I'd love to fix this. Humility always brings healing. I hate coconut. I don't know how you feel about coconut. I absolutely hate it. I cannot stand coconut. And if you go to buy a coconut whole, this is what it looks like. It looks naturally occurring in the wild. What's fascinating to me is it's almost impossible to get inside this coconut to eat it. Have you seen Castaway? Where, by yourself, stranded on a desert island, it's almost impossible to break this open and eat that. Do you know why that is? It's because God never intended you to eat coconut. I am convinced that the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden was coconut. God said, do not eat it. They ate it. They sinned. And if you like coconut, I think you fall in the same camp. I'm kidding. But here for me, this is the reality. If there's a list of things I hate in life, snakes is number 2. Snakes is the silver medalist. Coconut is the gold medalist. I cannot stand it because when you eat it, it doesn't go anywhere. It's like some naturally occurring plastic product that gets in your mouth. People put it in all kinds of different stuff, and I absolutely hate it. But here's what happens around my house. My wife loves coconut, and she will try to trick me into eating coconut. She'll come in with a coconut cream pie. I absolutely hate it. Listen, the only reason people eat German chocolate cake is because there's cake and sugar attached to the coconut. Coconut by itself is awful. She likes these. I don't know if you've eaten these. This is an advertisement. Ocho, hit me up. We'll do a advertisement deal, endorsement deal. These are like organic Almond Joy or whatever, and they're horrible. They're little candies with coconut disguised on the inside, wrapped in chocolate to try to get me to eat it. I'm not having any of it. I throw these out every chance I get. Why? Because coconut is coconut is coconut, and it is disgusting. I don't want it anywhere near me, and no matter how close coconut tries to get to me, I'm pushing it away every time. Coconut doesn't have a chance of getting in my life until one day I got a sunburn. I got sunburned, and my wife did something very strange. We didn't have any aloe. We were at somebody else's. We were like at a beach house. We didn't have any aloe. So she goes into the pantry and she goes in and she grabs this and she brings it back. You know, this is coconut oil. She brings this back and I said, "Get behind me, Satan. What are you doing?" But she said, No, just trust me. I said, "This is the weirdest thing I've ever done." She said, "Reach in there and grab some of that coconut, like I'm reaching into a jar, a vat of Crisco." It was crazy. I was like, what good is this going to do me? So I reached in, and when I put it on my hand, if you've done this, you know how this works. You get it on, and the second coconut oil touches your skin, it turns to liquid. She said, now take that and rub that on your shoulder. And I rubbed it on my shoulder and I rubbed it on my arms, and it was like getting a hug from a velvet puppy dog. It was like the greatest thing in the world. Rubbed it on my shoulders, rubbed it on my arms, and oh man, it made my sunburn feel amazing. Here's the picture. The same thing that I couldn't stand and wouldn't let anywhere near me. When it came to me in the right form, it brought healing and changed my willingness to be around it. Humility is the supernatural ability that followers of Jesus have to be the same person in the same relationship. There's been a gap, there's been hurt. It feels like it's almost impossible to fix that relationship, but yet when we are humble, it brings healing. Humility is the posture of a Jesus follower to say, I know that the only reason I have hope is because of Jesus. I've been changed from the inside out by Jesus. I have new life because of Jesus, and I know the only hope for our relationship is Jesus. And if you'll pray a very simple prayer, maybe this week as you make an effort to close a gap with someone, maybe there's someone that God's put on your heart as I've been talking where you think, I'd love to close the gap with that person, but I just don't know how. One of the most powerful spiritual things you can do is just to pray a prayer to say, Jesus, I want to go into this relationship, not dukes up, but palms up. You watch what happens when the posture of your heart changes from this to this. It has a profound ability to change a relationship and close gaps. But it starts with a humble prayer to say, Jesus, I humble myself before you because I know that you exalt the humble and you resist the proud. And I want you to be involved in this relationship and help me close this gap, but I need your help. Start with humility and you watch what God does. See, Jesus' people are called to be people that stand in the gap. Throughout the Bible, we see pictures painted of places where there was a gap between God and people or between people and people. And over again, it says there was nobody to stand in that gap. We read that in Ezekiel. It says God's looking and he says there's nobody to stand in this gap. Job says this with the trouble that he gets in. He says there was no mediator, nobody to stand between me and God and close that gap. When Abraham is looking at the city of Sodom, He says, what if there's just 10 people, just 10 righteous people that can stand in the gap? Would you spare the city and bring restoration? And God says, absolutely. And as he looks at the city, there weren't 10 people to stand in the gap. When Jesus looks at our relationships, I think he celebrates more than anything people that say, I will stand in the gap. I will be the person that brings healing to this relationship. That's why he says in Matthew chapter 5, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. See, I think when you look at a spiritual family photo of all of God's sons and daughters, you know what characteristic I think we all have in common? Is that we're peacemakers. I think it's fascinating that Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, and he didn't say, blessed are the point makers. One of the really difficult things right now when there's such animosity between groups of people, it's so easy on social media or on a text or in a relationship to come in to make a point. And Jesus says, would you just consider having a different posture? Because people that stand in the gap are the people that are willing to say, I'm here to make peace, not make a point. I think one of the best questions you can ask this week is just this. Am I walking into this relationship to make peace or make a point? Because when you walk in to make peace, you walk in as a child of God. You walk in with the supernatural power of the Holy Spirit. I think God empowers through his Holy Spirit God ideas and God words to say when we step into that gap and we say, God, I'm going to stand in this gap. I'm going to be a peacemaker. I told you about my neighbor Don. When I made that decision to get in their world, it was more than just being nice to your neighbors. I really believe that God brought me into their world so they could experience Jesus, so they could find the grace of God. And over time, I met a lot of those young men, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, probably 15, 20 of them that hung out at that house. The ringleader of all those guys was a young man named Adrian. Adrian was a DJ, a very talented kid, great kid. But I found out as I got close to them and had conversations that he had moved out from his house because of a really tough experience with his dad. And as I got close to Adrian, one night Adrian came back from kind of a party and he pulled up. And I was watering my lawn because that's what I did, right, to get close to him. So literally, this is hilarious. I was watering my lawn at 10 o'clock at night because I heard them pull up. So I'm going to go out there just so I can have an excuse to get close and talk to him. So I went out there, and there was a big rock right next to where he pulled up. And I sat down on that rock, and he just said this. He was smoking at the time, and he just said, does any of this bother you, the party that I went to, me doing this? And I just said, hey, Adrian, can I just tell you this? I'm just glad you're safe. I'm just glad you're home. And we started talking, and he knew I was a pastor. We had talked about that, and he said, hey, are you having church tomorrow? I said, yeah, we're having church tomorrow. I told him the time, and I got a text the next morning at church. He said, I'm here. Don't want to talk. I don't want to talk. I just wanted to let you know I was here. And over the next several weeks, I would get a text, and he would tell me, I'm at church. And then one week, he sent me a text. He said, you know that prayer you pray at the end of your services? He said, I prayed that prayer, and I'm following Jesus. I can't tell you how thrilled I was, but even more than that, I was thrilled. Like 2 or 3 weeks later, when he sent me a text, he said, are you preaching this Sunday? I said, yeah. He said, good, because my dad is coming to church with me. God did a miracle, not only of grace in Adrian's heart, but he restored Adrian's relationship with his dad and his family. Adrian moved out a couple weeks later back to be with his family. God did a miracle, not because I was amazing, but because here's the picture. Someone was willing to stand in the gap. Gaps don't get closed by anything but people. People are God's methods to close gaps. When he needed to close the gap between you and him, he sent a person. He sent Jesus. When he needed to close the gap between you and the people in your life, can I tell you who he's going to send? He's going to send a person. You know who I think he wants to send? I think he wants to send you. And when we're willing to be people that stand in the gap, we make room for God to do miracles. So my prayer for you this week is that you would just palms up, walk into those relationships and say, God, I don't know what you can do, but I'm making room for a miracle because I believe you want unity and you want peace way more than I do. That posture of humility is where miracles start. I believe God wants to restore marriages, relationships between parents and kids, build great teams in jobs and schools and churches. And when we're a group of people, me, you, our families, when we say yes to that, God does amazing things. Let me pray for you. Lord, today as we've had a chance to talk, I simply just take a second and pray for my brother and my sister. Would you work in their life? Would you give us this supernatural willingness to be humble, to close gaps? Because when we close gaps, we are like Jesus. Would you reach through this video? Would you touch hearts? Would you give us boldness? And as we step into these situations, these relationships this week, would you give us God ideas and God words? Because we believe that you work miracles where we are willing to be used by you. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed Pastor Ethan's message. Now, here's what you need to do. There's a couple steps. Comment. What was the thing that stood out to you in Pastor Ethan's message? Maybe it was one of the illustrations. Maybe God spoke to you in a certain way. Put that in the comment, guys. Guess what? We see those and we want to respond back. If you need prayer for anything, put it in the comment. We would love to reach out to you. So make sure you do this. Subscribe and turn on your notifications, and we cannot wait to see you guys soon.